What actually happens to Gaza after Hamas is dismantled? Given the fact that Israel has made the unprecedented decision of declaring war on Hamas in Gaza, they are ultimately going to do everything in their power to dismantle Hamas. This will likely involve some sort of ground occupation of the Gaza Strip. But the question has to be asked: what happens after Hamas is dismantled? Occupying Gaza will be tricky to begin with. It's a tiny strip of land that's very densely populated, with a total population of about 2.3 million people. Hamas has likely been preparing for a ground war for months, so the whole of the area is likely covered in IEDs and traps for the Israeli military. Additionally, even though there's been a bunch of evacuation orders, Gaza is poor and crowded. There's a lot of people who just aren't gonna leave the target areas. This will make any ground operations difficult. But assuming Israel is able to successfully defeat Hamas, what then? Efforts at joining Gaza and the West Bank into a united Palestine under the PLO have failed. Which is why they have Hamas now as their government. Israel doesn't want them. Egypt doesn't want them. So what else is there? The other option in theory is just setting up Gaza as an independent state. One with its own government, elections, constitution, etc. But given the fact that Gaza literally elected Hamas, how would that even work either? There were questions of fraud in the previous Gazan elections. But still, what's to stop Gaza from electing another Hamas? Obviously, it's likely that the initial stage of this conflict between Israel and Hamas will end with the destruction of the latter. But I really don't see what comes next. What do you think will happen? Is there hope for Gaza to develop into a prosperous independent state? Dismantling Hamas won't magically turn Gaza into fucking Disneyland. Israel's not gonna annex it. And neither will Egypt. You might get a power vacuum, which is like ringing the dinner bell for every extremist group around. And sure, maybe there's a chance for a UN-led administration or even a Palestinian Authority takeover. But given the historical beef and distrust, good fucking luck. Expect chaos, shifting alliances, and a clusterfuck of interests jostling for control. Hope for a prosperous independent state? It's gonna be a bumpy-ass ride with no guarantees. Hamas by design cannot be removed. Even when Israel occupied Gaza, they could not wipe out Hamas. They can only be set back and contained. There is no real workable solution. Just like when the US tried to create a government in Iraq or Afghanistan, there was too much violence. These groups vying for power in these regions do not care about the civilians. They only want power. And if power requires the death of innocents and children, then they are willing to do it. The PLO is seen as illegitimate, incompetent and corrupt by most Palestinians, so it's probably a non-starter. If Israel is able to extirpate Hamas in Gaza, which I doubt, I expect Israel will ask the UN to bring in a peacekeeping force comprised of Arabs and hold elections. If Hamas or a like-minded group should prevail in the elections, then I expect Israel will build a second wall and a no-man's land between it and the existing wall, and leave Gazans to fend for themselves, reliant on Egypt and the goodwill of Arab and European patrons. I mean, the issue is that Gaza exists and the population lives in squalor and at the whims of what they consider a foreign power. A power vacuum created by eradicating Hamas will only be filled eventually by a similar organization because the same issues remain. The PLO can be appointed as a provisional government. Elections can be held in a year or two, but any party that runs must recognize the State of Israel. What happens to an area that has almost 50% unemployment? Lol, is this a serious question? Without a serious policy solution, more death and misery. Obviously. Hamas will not really be dismantled. Once Israel completes their campaign, they will leave. That will create a power vacuum in Gaza. Eventually, Hamas or an equivalent group will resurface to fill the gap. So long as no legitimate government holds power in Gaza, Hamas cannot be defeated. Another third world county, but this time with a DMZ that probably rivals the one between North and South Korea. Somewhere between the end of Hamas and the inability of Israel to cede a meaningful and cohesive amount of the W. Bank or Jerusalem in a final deal, conditions decline again. There's no plan for whatever happens after Israel feels done with Gaza. So plans thereafter are barely a gleam in some peace negotiator's eye. Israel has a manifest destiny thing going on with the WB settlements and a capital in and of Jerusalem that I don't see them trading in for what's behind curtain number 2. So what happens is another peace initiative that stagnates. Maybe they should worry about step 1 first before moving immediately into daydreaming about paving over the Palestinians' corpses. Well, more than they have already. Bigger dogs than them have tried and failed to genocide away radicalized guerrilla resistance. See the United States. 1945 present. I fail to see why Israel will be more successful, especially when its existence as a settler colonial ethno-state inherently and constantly reinforces the conditions that gave rise to Hamas and other Palestinian resistance groups in the first place. All of the Palestinians will be dead and the Israelis will rejoice in their successful genocide. I believe Israel gets to build all the settlements they want. And oppression, hate, terrorism and death will continue. The beat goes on. As long as Israel continues to keep Palestinians from Israel, then there will be terrorists. The same thing that happened in other areas of the Middle East after the West invaded. Power vacuums. More brutal and horrible people to fill the power vacuum. Justified by tens of thousands of innocent deaths. You don't end something like this by killing them. You make martyrs, which gives the next generation reason to revolt. Easy. Kill them all, take the land and pretend nothing ever happened. That's the plan. Unless Israel pulls a French Algiers on Palestinians, which is politically non-viable, we'll be back here a good decade's time. Well, since Israel is using Gaza as punching bag and class enemy to keep their population complacent with increasingly fascist government, I really doubt they want to improve things in Gaza. If that was their goal, they'd do a long time ago. The Israeli government has already gone pretty mask off with its earlier demands of North Gaza and those in the south seeking safety to be moved into refugee camps in the Sinai. The preferred Israeli method of dealing with Palestinians is just to ethnically cleanse them. Israel and the IDF might settle for destroying most of Gaza, killing tens of thousands of civilians, fighting whatever resistance they can find in North Gaza, and then just declare mission accomplished. Hamas has been broken or whatever. And then the question is if the IDF actually leaves North Gaza and allows people back in. You can't massacre your way out of your troubles in this modern world. Hamas isn't a tribe of villagers. It's a reactionary, political movement. Even if you kill every Hamas member, it would still exist. For a preview of what to expect, look at Lebanon. A completely ungovernable mishmash of hicks interspersed with the victims of their incompetence who could otherwise be inventing the next algebra. Well, there will be an occupation which will require about 60,000 troops to successfully occupy the Strip. After that, I imagine there will be some transfer of administration, possibly to a third-party country, most likely the Palestinian Authority. My hope is for a third-party country, which will provide Israel with security while keeping them from the Palestinians.